My name is Kenyatta A.C. Hinkle, and I am the Assistant Professor of Painting in the Department of Art Practice. We are so pleased and honored to host Nona Faustine's lecture, I Was Brought Here to Stay, today for Arts and Design Mondays, a weekly series coordinated by the Office of Berkeley Arts and Design, which is led by Associate Vice Chancellor Shannon Jackson. And we are particularly grateful to the A&D office for supporting the staff and space costs of BAMPFA so that we can host our amazing speakers in this beautiful theater. This event is also being supported by the Department of Art Practice's Weisenfeld Lecture Series in the Department of African American Studies. Our next event for the Weisenfeld Lecture Series will be in co-sponsorship with the Department of African American Studies on Monday, October 21st for the artist Caitlin Cherry from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. at Platform Art Space in Worcester Hall. Tonight, I'm so thrilled and delighted to share an artist that personally means so much to me. The inspiration for the curation of this lecture series stems from a conversation series that I always imagined developing called If We Must Die, Conversations about the Intersections of Social Justice, Art, and Healing. Nona's work, spirit, and essence encompasses all of these layers and so much more. Nona Faustine is a photographer, visual artist, and Brooklyn native. She received her undergraduate degree from the School of Visual Arts and her MFA from the International Center of Photography at Bard College. Faustine's images have received worldwide acclaim and have been published in a variety of national and international media outlets from the New York Times, Huffington Post, Hyperallergic, New Yorker, The Guardian, Elle Magazine, Artforum, among many others. Her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally from the Ford Foundation, Harvard University, to the Tomie Ohtake Institute in Brazil. Faustine's images are in the collection of the Studio Museum of Harlem, the David C. Driskell Center at Maryland State University, the Brooklyn Museum, and the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. In 2020, she will have an exhibition at the Andy Warhol Museum. She is a finalist in the 2019 Outwin Boochever, am I saying that right now? Ooh, I said it right. Competition at the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery on view this fall of 2019. And she is a recent recipient of the Colleen Brown Art Prize for Brooklyn-based artists. Situated inside a photographic tradition while questioning the culture that bred that tradition, Nona Faustine's practice walks the fine line between past and present, beginning where intersecting identities meet history, exploring her family album in relationship to collective belonging and self-portraiture in relationship to empowerment. Faustine examines the legacy of trauma, lineage, and history. Her body becomes a channel for the known and unknown individuals who make up our past, present, and future. Reconstructing a narrative of race, memory, and time that delves into stereotypes, folklore, and anthropology. Faustine's works are, in her words, meditative reflections of history Americans have not come to terms with, challenging the duality of what is both visible and invisible. Her talk will feature aspects of her practice that challenges the visual writers of history and summons viewers to question our own roles in making and unmaking historical wounds. Without further ado, please welcome Nona Faustine.
Thank you for coming, and thank you, Kenyatta, for that very warm, generous welcome. So today I'll just, it's a little short, but you know what, I'll stand for a while. So today I'll just give you a run through my work, and you know, if any point you want to stop me and ask me something really pressing, we can do that. Can you hear me all? Okay. All right, so so this first image was a studio, well, it began in 2012, I would say, and it was inspired by two women who I feel was like key to me developing the series White Shoes. The first one being Venus Hottentot, aka, well, aka Venus Hottentot, Sarah Bartman. And she was a South African woman who was lured by a doctor on a ship to London, England. And from there, she was put on display. This is in the 19th century. And she was then brought over to Paris. And she was quite the sensation in Europe. And this was when human zoos began. So she was put on display, mostly naked, but in a stocking. And, you know, the Europeans had never seen a woman like that. She was from the Khoikhoi tribe in South Africa, so she was very voluptuous, very large behind, and they made songs about her, playing cards, plays, even fashion imitated her large buttocks, you know, with the bustle skirts. All of that came from seeing this type of woman, African woman. So, as well as another woman, we only know her by the name of Delia, and she was enslaved on a plantation in South Carolina in 1850 as well. And her image, along with many of the other slaves, enslaved people, were commissioned by J.T. Zeeley and Henry Louis Agassiz, who was a Harvard professor. He had her, as well as others, images daguerreotyped. And it's the first time we see African Americans photographed. And from those images, we would see that many of the way they photographed them, front, center, side and back profiles, were later used in imagery for the criminally insane, for, you know, criminals as well. And so all of that came out, these set of images. And later on, they were found in a closet somewhere in the Peabody Museum in the 70s. And later on, the artist Carrie Mae Williams would use them in her work. And so these images kind of made me want to respond to the way that photography was used to categorize, miscategorize, and objectify a whole people. And so this was my response to that image. And I would have those two pictures on my studio wall while I was a graduate. And so I just felt this very strong kinship and solidarity with these women, being seen but not seen, their humanity taken away in many ways. And so I began taking pictures of myself, which I had never done before. And so then I spent the summer on the beach at Coney Island in Brooklyn that faced the Atlantic. And I had never really went to the beach before, I had went to the beach, but never wore a bathing suit to the beach. And so being a new mother and wanting to share new experiences with my daughter, I spent the summer at the beach and had an incredible time. And Coney Island is, if you ever been, how many people have been to Brooklyn, Coney Island? Oh, great. So if you ever been, well, the ones who haven't, it's a sea of diversity, all body types, all shapes and sizes, and no one makes you feel like you are different. And so that was like incredible to me. But I was paying attention. I didn't know it, but I was paying attention to the people. And when the summer was over, I kind of still hung out there. And by the time the summer was over, I just had it. I had the idea of White Shoes. It would be about place. It would be about the city. It would be about your body in that place, responding to the environment around you, and the history that was there. And so, of course, this place faces the Atlantic, the transatlantic slave trade. Um, so that was key for me right in the beginning. And also the history of this place. Brooklyn was once called Long Island. It's a large landmass, Long Island. And slave ships were still smuggling enslaved people up the coast even after the embargo. There was embargo where you could not bring any more slaves into the country. But as you've probably have heard and learned, they were still doing that, not just in Brooklyn, but all up and down the coast, including the Catilla, which I think was the last slave ship in Mississippi. So this image was called "Like a Pregnant Corpse." The ship expelled her into the patriarchy, and I had the idea of the white shoes. I had went and bought a pair of white shoes, before, as you saw in the other picture. And I had this idea about what the white shoes represented. And, but they also, while they were representing patriarchy and femininity, they were also talking about, race as well. And I continued to photograph even into the winter. That was October for four. And as you know, East Coast, it gets cold, but it was a warm October. And by this time, it's November and it's freezing. But it was some kind of comfort I found, some kind of comfort, but ways of I don't know, meditating in that space on the rocks and the sound of the ocean and the birds and the waves hitting the rocks and my body, melding into the landscape sculpturally, and how if you could be perhaps an enslaved person on that slave ship to just any way you could escape, and this place would be your home, kind of. And when I had showed this image to Dina Lawson, the photographer, she said, "You made yourself into a goddess." And I didn't even realize it, but it became kind of mythological, this image for me, a symbol of a mythology, of recreating another story for yourself, another narrative for yourself. And that bird, taking flight, if you could fly with him or transform yourself into him. It just all, at the perfect moment, that bird came in and what it symbolized, freedom and transformation. But I became so comfortable at the beach, I decided the real story was in the landscape of New York City, like the concrete New York City, right? And even though we, as raised as New Yorkers and native-born New Yorker, in school we were taught that slavery was ended very early. We didn't have much slavery going on there. We freed our slaves in like 1827, and all that stuff. But the founding of the African burial ground across the street from Supreme Court told us a different story, a story of a cemetery that was outside of the original city limits, 15 to 20,000 bodies buried underneath the concrete of New York. That literally meant they were the foundation of the city. And so what does it mean when you build, your highest courts and municipal buildings and city government buildings on top of people, when you desecrate their remains, people who built New York City, literally with their hands, and died, and their remains, their sweat is in the land. And so the challenge to me was to kind of confront that history and put myself there. So I'm standing on the steps of the Supreme Court. And each one of these images became an immense challenge. As you can imagine, a city the size of New York. And all this area is where One Police Plaza, City Hall, Tweed Courthouse, these are all like major, city governments and police. And I remember having my instructor and teacher, Nayland Blake, when I told him about the project that I wanted to do, he was like, do you understand what this means if police come upon you in the street? This is an act of civil disobedience. And, I had other people tell me, like, how to conduct myself, because it's a misdemeanor. You can't be arrested. And then, a black body defying, the police in New York City, you just don't want to have those interactions. So, I was given the advice, but I still proceeded. And not far off the corner is a little police, like, station, like a little glass box where they sit, because this is New York Supreme Court, right? And so the first time we went there, like, they were looking dead at us. I usually travel just me and my sister Shannon, who was my photo assistant, and we couldn't do it. It was like, as soon as you go to set that camera up, and boom, they're like on you, right? So we went back again with my neighbor, my classmate, her wife, and a couple other people, and the whole idea was, they were South Africans, so they were going to pretend like they were tourists, and they would stand in front blocking them so they couldn't see me, while my neighbor was like right here but out of view of the lens, so she's in line with me. And so we set the camera up, and then I like through my and hit the shutter, and boom, like, it was like such a covert, it's kind of funny, but what you have to do to prove your point, or do your work, it's astounding. And so we pulled it off, and I would go a couple of times because I was never satisfied, and I would go a couple of times each time, till one day I saw, the last time we went, we set up the camera. This time it was just me and my sister. We had had enough, like, where we felt we could do it. And so we set up the camera, and I could literally, like, when you're that vulnerable and naked, there's forces that you have to use. Like, your senses are gone. You're paying attention to the camera, but you are still, like, kind of blind. So all I could do was hear as I'm focusing for the camera, and I could hear the cops in the booth. There's a girl here. And I was like, okay, we nailed it, boom. And then a cab was coming right by, and I jumped off the steps and hailed the cab, and we jumped in the cab and, like, took off down the block. I was like, oh my God, that was thrilling. So it was like, it was like I was pulling one off every time. Like, I was sticking it to the man every time, But at the same time, my heart was still always thinking about the people buried literally underneath my feet, the tunnels that went literally through their cemetery. This cemetery was like, if you do any research on it, it was their place, it was their home. Like, it wasn't just where they buried their dead, that it was their place where they performed ceremonies, where they can be together, where they could share in their grief, because remember, it's outside the city limits. Like, the city limits, if you know New York City, where Trinity Church was, that was the original center of New York. So this is Tweed Courthouse, and this day it was 18 degrees. And this Tweed Courthouse, behind it is City Hall, but the steps all the way in front is part of this cemetery. It's 6.6 acres in New York. That's a lot. And I don't think they even really know how many bodies, really. I mean, it's on the map. But this was the day before I scout my sites, and so the day before, it was fine. I took a picture and everything. And I was so surprised when I came back the next day, the temperatures had dropped, it had, some precipitation, and the steps were coated with ice. But someone said to me, it looks like, tears, like hundreds of thousands of tears. And I remember at one point them recreate or excavating or creating these steps. They're a new addition to this building. Now it's been about over 10 years, but at the time, they had dug up the sidewalk and they hit part of the cemetery. And so this happens a lot. Like, when they first discovered it or claimed they first discovered it, they didn't know it was there. And that was when they were building this federal tower. And when they built the federal tower, that was when they hit the cemetery. And people didn't know that it was there. But in New York City, whenever you have to build something, you have to go to the city maps, which reveal this cemetery or anything that was there of worth that our colonial forefathers deemed important. And that map also included the African cemetery. So it's like no way they could not know it was there. But at that time, I remember the city exploded, with activism and people coming down to Lower Manhattan, protesting, this federal tower. And they did get it scaled back, but they still, disturbed the remains. 450 people were pulled out of the earth and studied. But they did have an interment and they did put them back, and they were able to have a memorial built there. And if you ever in New York City, I urge you to go to Duane and Broadway. It's an incredible memorial. The bodies are reinterred inside, but they also talk about the life of New York City then and enslaved people, and it's pretty incredible. So this image is called Over My Dead Body. And, I create these little narratives for myself. I envision in this image of me going back to confront the people who disturbed those remains, who enslaved those people. And again, I often go back several times to some sites when I feel like I haven't really touched upon all that site has to say. And this one as well, trying to push the building down or off the cemetery. And then I moved to, of the many places, in Brooklyn. So that was in Manhattan, and this is in Brooklyn. This is not far from where I live, Flatbush, which was a Dutch colonial neighborhood originally. And this cemetery is a pre-Revolutionary War cemetery, and in it are some of the most powerful families of colonial New York who were major slaveholders. And the streets around this neighborhood are mostly named for them. And if you look at the old headstones, it reveals the names of these families who are now named throughout Brooklyn. And this image is called, oh, I got a blank. It'll come back to me. I give these long titles sometimes. And sometimes when I'm in the middle of a talk, I just draw a blank. But I'll tell you what they actually mean. They're cardboard cutouts. They're actual cardboard cutouts. And they stand in place of the people who are the 3 enslaved people we know that are buried in the cemetery. So the families deemed them special enough to be interred in this mostly white cemetery. And we don't know where in the cemetery they are, but I felt like I needed to stage an intervention by putting my body with lopped off heads and missing face to stand in for the millions, if not thousands of people who we don't know their names, who are lost to history, and who will never be recognized for their contributions. And in this case, we do have if you in the cemetery did keep a list of people interred, and those three enslaved people are on the list along with their names and age. And yes, so that's what that is. And this one is called Scarred Earth. And, you know, around where I live in Brooklyn, because it's so old and so much history has happened there, it just struck me that you could be walking through a place and something of historic significance could have happened, or something violent could have happened, and you never know it. And what that means, right? And do the land hold the memory of that? And oftentimes you can walk through a space and feel something. There's something not right. You don't know what it is. And so I had this conversation on the train one day with a woman who said that the land was crying out from the blood. And I was like, you know, and she was a white woman. And so that struck me even more for her to acknowledge that. And across the street from here, this is the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, but all of this was once farmland and land that was tilled by enslaved people. And across the street is Prospect Park, which part of the Revolutionary War was fought. And Washington, the British, the whole 9 yards. And so I just thought about, you know, the violence that the land holds, but also, you know, violence against women as well. All of that came into my memory. And so I take that with me when I go on the site. Sometimes I just have a feeling that this is where I should be. And so this was in early spring. As you can see over there, these little bluebells coming up. And this tree is called the Caucasian wingnut. And so I knew that that was like a signifier to me. I was like, yes, this is the tree. And so, you know, but it's a really old tree. And I wondered, was it there before the botanical garden? Because it's just really old. And then I came back in the summer, and this was the tree in the summer. This is the front of the tree. And I was like, wow, you know. But again, it was a place for me to put my body. And there was this quote by Harriet Tubman. Is sometimes when you go to these sites, you can't get a sense of history or what it feel like then, or imagine. I'm always doing that. I'm always trying to imagine what it could have looked like before human hands destroyed all of it. And this gave me a little bit of it. And I also feel it's important to put Black people in nature, to see us in those situations other than urban settings all the time. You know, it makes one forget that we were, as I was saying to Kenyatta, farmers, cowboys, cowgirls. You know, we were conjurers, using nature, using herbs, healers, you know, from Africa to here now. You know, my family is not just African American, we're also Native American and probably European American. But, you know, we have all of that elements, and I just felt that it was important to use my body in those places. And so I'm wearing an African mask from the Dam people. I've been researching my family's lineage, and the stories that my mother would tell me about my great-grandmother being one of the last enslaved people brought over during slavery. But now I've researched that, and we found that's not true. That it's going back probably further. We found recently a great-great-grandmother that we didn't even know. But still, I felt this deep kinship to her. I don't know what she looks like, but my mom told me that as I grow older, I look a lot like her. So that was me, you know, my kind of homage to her. And so this image is the Lefferts family house, 4 generations of Dutch lived in this house. It was built by enslaved people. It is now a museum. And I've passed by this house almost all my life and did not know the history of this house until I started the project. And I wanted to talk about in this image, and it's a series of 3 images, and it's called Not Gone with the Wind. This house, my family has a southern background, North Carolina, and I'm always somehow connected to architecture that reminds me of the South, and certainly this did, even though it's not exactly southern. But I wanted to talk about the children that was lost to enslaved women and how generations upon generations later it still stays with us. And this family, the Lefferts, was one of the major slaveholding families, and they bought slaves, they sold slaves, the whole 9 yards. And I looked at a list of their enslaved people, and one of them was named Isabel. And so this image I named Isabel, and I'm holding my great grandmother's frying pan. And it also talked to me about the domestic work of African American women. We raised generations upon generations of Americans, nannies, wet nurses, but yet we are not considered like the image of motherhood, you know. But at the same time, this also is kind of a tribute to the generations of women in my family who have been mothers and certainly nannies and servants, and the kind of work that you have to do, but when their children are not there, when their children are lost, when their children are sold. And so those shoes, I came up with the idea like the night before I went to this space, or the day before, and I took pictures. The sun was perfect and everything, and I took the pictures, but there was something missing, and that night I realized what it was. And so I had kept my daughter's shoes, and I just made a little shoe belt, and that was it for me to feel like I had nailed it and what I was trying to say. And the next image was called Lobbying the Gods for a Miracle. And so in the first one you saw her looking out somewhere, and I imagined it was her children being sold. And then the next one you see a formal portrait of her. And then this one is when she decides to take her freedom into her own hands and take her freedom back. And so this is not far from the house. This is not far from the Revolutionary War sites in Prospect Park. And so all of this, like, history and trauma in the land just spoke out to me, and I felt like this was an important site and still is. And they even say that in this park there are still remains from the Revolutionary War in the park itself. And so there's not any place in New York City that enslaved people or African people have not lived. And I found that in Chinatown, of all places, it was once an African American neighborhood. And this is on the Bowery in Rivington. This park is part of a second African burial ground, and I found that there were at least 3, there may be more, they, a lot of times, and all over the country, as time passed, maybe people forget, maybe it's intentional, but places where African people are buried are often covered up. Um, Cemeteries become playgrounds, they become soccer fields, they even become schools. There's so much building on top of burial grounds instead of, you know, respecting them. And oftentimes you'll see there's a site in the Bronx where there's this beautiful preserved white cemetery, and then you'll see this open field over here. And these children, these school children, with their professors found that the space across from the white cemetery was actually a huge black cemetery. But the stones, the headstones had been removed or had, you know, disintegrated. They're often not made of beautiful, you know, stone like, you know, in the white cemeteries. And so oftentimes wood disintegrates and or whatever, or stones are moved. And so, but with this one, some of the bodies were, they believe, were disinterred, but a lot of them are underneath the buildings of the Lower East Side. And when they built the new museum, they found remains of that cemetery. And so activists know about it. They've been trying to, you know, fight for, you know, proper recognition of these places. But of course, you know, the real estate being so much of what it is, it's very difficult. But they're trying not to have new buildings built, but it's almost like, you know, you're fighting a losing battle. So in front of me is a soccer field, and on the side is the sidewalk and then the street. And so MTA, which owns part of it, have mapped out, and you'll see in when you do research that they believe also remains on the sidewalk of this former cemetery. And this is called a proper place because when the elders of the community ran out of, when the other cemetery was closed near City Hall, they went to the city and asked for a proper place to bury their dead. And so it was 2 years between that cemetery closing and the new cemetery. And you have to wonder where they were burying their dead. And this is this is Brooklyn as well. This is Brooklyn's Borough Hall. And this image is called Lenape Hoking. And it's the image that I diverted from speaking about African American history to Native American history. And when you research New York, you cannot do any research without coming across the Lenape Indians, who were the dominant, you know, people of that land. And all of downtown Brooklyn was their headquarters, or this spot actually was their headquarters, according to research. And again, what does it mean when you take up people's land and then you build your highest offices and city municipalities on their land, and the streets and sidewalks of this bustling metropolitan area were actually trails, former trails. So all the streets and avenues that were formerly, that are ours today, were once theirs. And I have been researching images, looking at images of like Jacqueline Onassis, Jacqueline Kennedy, when the assassination of President Kennedy. I have been looking at images of Coretta Scott King, and the similarities between them of certainly of having husbands who were assassinated, but also that mourning, that black veil, those white shoes, again. And it was something where I felt was necessary to use to depict a mourning, sorrow that can still be felt, and still we have not addressed. And This is in Wall Street area. This is Federal Hall. I Even though a lot of the places are not really known and recognized, I felt like I needed to include this because I needed to talk about the presidents who owned slaves, right? Who were notorious slave holders, in my opinion, who actually hunted their slaves when they escaped, and Washington was one of them. And so, I originally wanted to throw my shoe at at the statue, but I decided to just hold it. It's like, there's this moment of kind of giving up to your sorrow, to time, to history. What can you do? It has passed already. But still, you hold that memory, that trauma. And I strongly believe that trauma is passed down from person to person, from generation to generation, within families, even mother to child. And scientists are now doing research just on that indeed is the case, that you can inherit trauma from your family, from your mother, from your father, that it registers actually in the DNA when something horrific happens to them, that it can be passed down to the next generation, even if they don't tell you. And definitely Holocaust survivors, they're doing a lot of research around that and have found that that is the case with them. And I strongly believe, as many scholars and historians do, that African Americans definitely have inherited trauma. But at the same time, I think that definitely slaveholders and white people have inherited that trauma as well. The fact that one group can talk about it, African Americans, and another group, white people, don't or can't or have a blockage about it. That blockage to me is trauma. And so a lot of my work is also strongly research based. It's about finding these hidden places and spaces that we lived. As a city, it's important to me because the city is going through massive transformation. All urban centers all over the country. The history that is embedded in these places is incredible. And the fact that so little of it is known, so little of it is taught. And this space is, again, in Chinatown. 72 Canal was once Sojourner Truth's place. This is where she lived. The tenement wasn't there, but the address is still the same, 72 Canal. And so all of that area, like I said, was an African American neighborhood and holds great history. John Brown, when he was killed, his body was brought to New York, and not far from here, he was embalmed by, and his body sat until it was shipped back. So it's a lot of history in this neighborhood. And this is the third place that African Americans have a massive cemetery. This is in Harlem, 126 and First. It's a bus depot now, but at one point it was part of this larger church and called Negro Burial Ground. And they found remains when they got ready to renovate the bus depot. As you can see, buses were still pulling up there. They closed it, but inside they were doing excavations. And they were going to make a larger, bus depot, but the community and activists, protest enough to stop it. But they're still going to do something with it. I think what they wait is until the publicity dies down, till people forget, and then they, go back to their original plans of some sort. But the cemetery is very large. It's very old. It's like starting from the 1600s. So you can imagine it stayed open for like a couple of hundred years. So, and in front is the East River. So the Harlem River Drive and the Harlem River. So you can imagine like how many bodies can pile up at that point over generations. And so somehow this got out of line, but the Wall Street image is an image that really has captivated people tremendously. This was the actual spot, according to research, of the slave market. And on Wall Street, they actually extended by several feet of landfill. But during colonial times, like right in front of me would have been where the water was, and ships would pull up and, unload their cargo, whatever that would be. Sometimes it was human beings. And in the mornings, they would come here and they would bid on human beings. So, and enslaved people built the wall that gave Wall Street its name. They were the first commodity. And this site was tremendous for me. Of course, I knew it. I didn't know the history of the site, but I had been there so many times. And like I said, you're walking through history every day and you don't even realize it. Like, I usually go to a site before and just get a feel of it, get an idea of where I should stand, what I should do. And I didn't do that before this picture. And so we got there before the sun had even come up. But I was so nervous when I realized that I had to stand in the middle of an intersection, and what that meant, like totally naked. Before you could hide, there were places that I could like duck and hide, or no one would see me, or quickly, perform and do the work and capture the image. But this one was like there was no place you could hide. There was 2 lanes of traffic. And there was some young men on the corner at one point, and they seemed totally unfazed, Then there's two, like, I go into this mode where I'm so nervous, like the adrenaline is pumping, like so hard. And I think that's a defense mechanism, kind of. And the 2 men went by me. I didn't even realize it. And my sister, she's kind of my ears and eyes. She tells me everything after it. And she's like, yeah, these 2 guys, they come by and they're like, oh, and they just kept on going. And I was like, wow, like if I saw me, my reaction would be totally different. But like, what is that woman doing standing in front? But I just remembered all the times I had been to that corner. Me and my sister running down Wall Street to catch a boat that would take us on some trip around the city. But at the same time, there was, in another dimension, there were people getting off a boat to be sold. And all of that like hit me. I almost didn't think I would be able to stand out there until my friend Davis came. And I had written this poem, I forgot it now, but I had written what it was actually like to stand there with the traffic going around. At one point, we got stuck in the middle of the intersection, and the cars literally just went past me, like they wouldn't even look at me. So again, that said to me, why? What was it that you wouldn't even stop for a human being, a naked human being, a woman in front of you? Wouldn't even stop. You wouldn't say, are you okay? Or why are you here? And I literally remember looking at this man as he drove right past me, refusing to even look at me. And again, what did that mean? What did I think that meant? And so, to deviate from the white shoes a bit, and this slide is not the best, but I'm laying in my house on an American flag, and my mother's in the left-hand corner. And this was at the time, at the height of Black Lives Matter protests. And I think Sandra Bland had just been killed, and I named this piece Say Her Name. But it was also, me actually, like, there was traditions in the South once upon a time where people would die and they would have the wake in the house. So, the funeral home would bring the body back to the house one last time. And what that actually meant for people who have been killed, how their family just want that body back one last time. And, I kind of like, so what would that be like for my mother? The feelings and the trauma really hit home very hard. And I at that time when I took the picture, like the whole house got silent. Like it was an incredible, poignant energy at that point. And so I continued. This is in the Bronx now, and I continue to do like all 5 boroughs, finding sites. I don't know if I'll ever be finished. That's okay with me. And this is called Slaves in the Attic No More. This is the Van Cortlandt Plantation. It's a park now, but it was once a plantation in the Bronx, and it's now a museum house. And even though it's weird, when you go to these museum houses, even still, they do admit the history, but they still kind of hide. So, like, they'll admit certain things and then they'll not admit certain things. Like, I was in Monticello, and I said to the woman, where is the room that Sally Hemings stayed in that was across from Thomas Jefferson's bedroom? And I said, I said there was a secret stairway that she used to use that so no one could see her if she wanted or he wanted. And she showed me at the end of the tour the staircase that was now covered, but she would not show me that bedroom. And I thought that was like, okay, if you're talking about slavery and you're really opening up and you're sharing that with everyone, why can't you show those details or tell those details, you know? So this house, what is really old, it goes back to the Revolutionary War. Washington stayed there. And again, Washington and Thomas Jefferson, they're like two kind of people that I find extremely interesting. Like, not just because they were presidents, but the power that they wield and the possibilities that they had if they could have really had foresight and bravery and courage to use them. Like, would we still be here having this discussion if they had abolished slavery? And they totally had the power to do it after the Revolutionary War. And this is another site in Brooklyn. This was part of the Adrian Van Buren's farmland. And like I said, all of it's farmland, and this site was where his slave cemetery was. Historians believe that. He certainly pointed that out in his diary that's in the Brooklyn Museum, that part of this land, and he had a lot of it, but part of this land right here was where his slave cemetery is, and as well, they believe interred our Revolutionary War soldiers. And certainly, at that time, they didn't have a special place where they were going to, inter these soldiers. They just locked them in where they fell. And this is the first time you see me wearing clothes. And I wanted to talk about kind of time as I put on layers of clothing until the end where I feel like I will be fully dressed. But the body was definitely used, in protest, in solidarity, the political weight of the black body when you see it in that form. And certainly this site as well, the city has wanted to build a school there. But of course, when the news got out, then they stop, halt, and it's still sitting there in this state. This was taken like last year, and I feel like they're just waiting for everything to die down, and they'll go on with their proceeding. So I'm going to jump to this other body of work, which I feel kind of ties into the White Shoes, called My Country series. And it's taking a look at iconic and contested monuments in America. And I was on the Staten Island Ferry one day going to an exhibition, and I was photographing the Statue of Liberty, as you often feel you should when you see her. And I saw this like frame going, something obscuring her, and I kind of did or did not know it was in the image. I was like, oh, you won't see it, and I just snapped it. But when I came home and opened it up, it was like a premonition to me. I was like, it was 2016, October, was it October? April 2016. And I was like, oh, Trump is gonna win. It was like a premonition. It was like a premonition. And I often look to the environment for signs. Should I come out and shoot today? No. Is this the place? Yes. I feel the energy here. But this one, I was like, this was a premonition. The fact that the pedestal of our symbol of freedom was obscured. She was so far away, like we're losing it. It was really dramatic for me. And so this became this series, the image that opened a new series, and it was called this image is called Fragment of Evidence. And a Fragment of Evidence was the name of an abolitionist newspaper. And so I decided that I would go down to Washington and get the feel of the land, so to speak. It was an urgency about going to Washington while Obama was in office and photographing the state of the nation, But also going back to that one, in that black line for me, when originally was the history of African Americans in our greatest iconic monuments that is little known. Like the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of immigrants, right? But it was given to us from France at the end of slavery, to commemorate the ending of slavery. And the chains around her feet, if you ever go there, are symbols of that. And the model for the Statue of Liberty was an African American woman, or black woman. And you can definitely go there and look at all that history and also look that up. So me putting that black line across, I decided to do it like intentionally as a symbol of the history that was ignored, that was erased. Certainly in the Washington Monument, I thought about Washington's slaves who were, accompanied him into battle, who were his greatest chefs, Hercules, and many others who were there at the beginning of the Revolutionary War in Boston and Concord and Lexington, who actually believed totally with their whole heart that all men should be free, but they are not mentioned in his monuments or anywhere near, him. And so that was one I inserted, and definitely into Lincoln. And these images I originally felt that they should be silk screens, and so I found a gallery that I'm working with called Two Palms that have blown these up like massive 60 by 50 silk screens, and just the acrylic and ink, seeing them that way takes on put them in a whole different context. I was really also inspired, by Andy Warhol, as odd as that may seem, but Andy Warhol definitely was paying attention to history in a lot of his works. He has works about during the civil rights movement of cops, sicking dogs on people, and he's made those into silk screens. So he was someone who was always paying attention to history, and he's definitely someone who I have admired in the way he produced images, and yeah. So I was gonna say something else, but and these images right here, they remind me of, certainly the architecture lends itself to Greek architecture, but Greek mythology and how, as America and Americans, create this myth of who we are, but it's not true. And so, and this is called this is Jefferson's Memorial, and I just love the way his, at the time his back is facing us, and that was, I'm still very, I don't feel like I've captured him really in the way that I want, but certainly at this time I felt I did. And this whole series too, the Black Line was about obstruction, about obstacles in the land. And so, certainly the Capitol building, again, a history where enslaved people built this. They built the White House, as, Michelle Obama told everyone. But at the same time, this gate area closed, even though they were doing some kind of construction. It symbolized an obstacle, a country that was going to go through a lot, something very traumatic. White House. And then I decided to change the Black Line into red for contested monuments. So this one is in front of the Museum of Natural History. It's Theodore Roosevelt. On one side is an African man, and the other side you can't see is a Native American man. And this statue is one of the many statues in the country that's been contested. And certainly this is one of them. One morning, activists threw red paint on it. They later erased it. And the museum has a mini show up right now at the Museum of Natural History in New York about the people contesting and protesting this image and this statue and wanting to take it down. Will they? I don't know. This is 59th Street, Columbus Circle. Certainly, last year, the city went through, they had a big meeting about all these statues, because New York as well have Confederate statues, and deciding whether to take it down. They decided that they would not take it down. But they did take the statue of Marion J. Sims, the gynecologist. They did take him down. And this is Charlottesville. These are new works. This is Robert E. Lee. And I happened to go there recently, about a week before the alt-right had just left town and had their anniversary upon killing that woman. They decided that this is their ground zero, and they will come back every year. And recently, Charlottesville decided they would not remove this statue as well, and as well as Stonewall Jackson, which is on the courthouse of the Charlottesville courthouse. And I even went to Mississippi, and this is Jackson, Mississippi. These are pillars from a slave plantation that they have recreated as sculptures in the middle of downtown Jacksonville, which I found really odd, but interesting. And just to speed it up, this is my other series called Mitochondria. And it's 3 generations of women in my family right now, my mother, my daughter, and myself. And we all live together, and my sister, Shannon. And so I felt like in beginning this, I was always taking pictures of my family and us. Well, not always, but I felt like, once again, you don't see the lives of Black women, the intimate spaces and places that we have, and our relationships with one another. And it inspired me to photograph us and share that. And this series was written about and shown in the New York Times. Maurice Berger, the art critic, wrote about this series. And to many people, they've told me, like like this work doesn't get enough attention, and it's actually one of their favorites. And I was extremely touched by that, because sometimes you don't think anyone is paying attention. And that's my mother, Queen Elizabeth. That's her actual name. She, yeah, right? Imagine growing up with that, right? Queen Elizabeth as your mother. Look at that look she's giving. One of my classmates, she saw this picture and she said, she looks like she has a herd of horses behind her, like that kind of strength, you know. Certainly a warrior, definitely. But my mother grew up in Washington, Wilmington, North Carolina. But she came to New York really early, and so she feels she's a New Yorker. You know, she's not a Southerner. She's a New Yorker, and that's her and my daughter. And I didn't name my daughter Queen Elizabeth, but I definitely gave her the Queen. You know, Queen Ming, because we're so close. You know, and I felt like I needed to do that. And so, you know, for me, this is it's kind of documentary of our lives together, and I think that's important. But it also takes you back to the family album. You know, my father was the family photographer. He's an amateur photographer. I think in another life he would have wanted to be a professional photographer. He definitely took these iconic images of my family down south, of his parents, you know, who were sharecroppers and, you know, sitting in the backyard under the trees, like these really iconic images that as a small child, I would go through these massive albums. And I think that's something that's lost to us right now, the family album. We take pictures digitally, you know, we don't print our images. You know, historians, photographers, scholars say that, you know, in the end, we'll be the least documented kind of generation, because the fact that we don't print our images, and those images may not last forever. We may not have the ability to go back and print them. But definitely motherhood is a theme, I think, throughout my work, even through the white shoes, in major ways. And this was when I first started, like, photographing myself on the roof of my apartment building. And one time I was showing this image, and it was these Italian family behind me. I could hear them, and when they saw this, they said, you know, and I realized that it was the church in the back over my head that made them, like. And, you know, if you ever been to Italy, the church is everywhere, the Madonna and Child and everything. And it was something, they recognized the iconography that I didn't, that the church and what that meant. And just our intimate moments. This was like the last time I breastfed my daughter. She was 2.5. And I was about to go to I was in grad school, and I realized, like, I could not do both, you know, continue to breastfeed her and go to grad school. That was like too much energy being expelled. So I decided to actually photograph the last time I breastfed her. And this is the last 2 images of a new series called Demeter and Persephone. And this image was exhibited in the Ford Foundation's new gallery this February that passed. And I've always been struck with this story of Greek mythology of Demeter and Persephone. Most of you know it, right? Demeter is the goddess of the harvest. She is goddess, you know, the earth, and her daughter is Persephone, was kidnapped by Hades and brought down to the underworld. But like I said, in Brooklyn and New York, I've been noticing so many Black homeless women, newly homeless, and what I realize is, as these neighborhoods transform, they still consider it their home. Where else are you gonna go? What, are you gonna pack up and go to some other neighborhood and stay and be on the street? No, you're gonna be where you know. And so I just imagined, like, I just thought that could be me one day, you know. But also I thought about the retelling of that myth through that context. So many African American young women are disappearing, and their families, their mothers looking for them, their families. And so there's little symbols also, though. The little white figure is Minoan Greek statue, and the little the African deities, and just how she has all her things that belong to her daughter, her dolls, her clothing. And this is also a spot at the beginning of Prospect Park. And so it's a retelling. I'll be there all winter and spring as Demeter looks for her daughter. And I'm even thinking about going further into the cemetery and just across all the parks using the architecture to retell the story. Oops, sorry. And this image is before the abduction. And this is a portrait of Demeter and Persephone and their dog Luna. And that's it. Thank you. So, any questions?
But before we even do that, Nona, just thank you.
Welcome.
Just thank you. So, can we give her a hand again? I'm just so Nona. Okay, I just had to take that moment. Do you all have any questions out there? We have some microphones that are going to go around. Yeah. Or I can talk to Nona and you can watch me. But I want you all to be able to ask questions.
Hi there.
Hi.
So you mentioned that your sister helps you with this, with the photography aspect. So I'm just curious, when you're, especially with the ones where you're totally nude and you're melding with the environment, like when you're on the rocks and you're up against the tree, are you directing at all, or is she giving you total feedback and you're just reacting to her visual experience of what she's seeing?
Yeah. So I've set up the tripod, and I use her as a stand-in. So I frame the shot around her, and if you see, I'll have a shot of every shot that I've done. There's a shot of her first, and she's my muse. She is my inspiration. She is my rock, my momager. So once I set up the tripod, and I photograph her, then I know where to stand, what I want to do. Boom. So she comes out, and I come in, I tell her when to hit the shutter, and I come back out and I check the film or the file. I don't rely on her as her, I got it. Because oftentimes, she's not a photographer, so she doesn't know a lot of times what I want, and I don't rely on her for that. So, I could use a remote, but in that context, we gotta be quick. And that's one of the things I learned from my instructor, who's like, it's no fiddling around out there. When you're out there, nail it, boom, because you could get caught at any time. I'm taking a risk. I could be arrested, I could be assaulted, I could be any number of things. And so for logistic reasons, I have to have someone there, and for safety reasons, I have to have someone there. So she's my someone, and that's how we do it.
How close are you in age?
3 years apart.
Oh,
Three and
wow.
a half years apart. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And you talked about this crew, to get the shot in front of City Hall,
Yeah.
that moral support.
Yeah.
and your body is a stand-in for thousands and millions.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense for you to have your crew of people there too, like distractions and all of these different things and these elements. I thought that that was just so compelling. And I'm really trying to work with this idea of like shifting the viewer from spectator to witness.
Right.
So you need witnesses there with you in that moment. Because what does it mean to go to these spaces alone?
Right. And but that site was the first time I was in the city doing it, so I was super nervous, like so scared, like at the Wall Street shot that was kind of out of context, but it was Supreme Court, City Hall, Tweed Courthouse, and then it was Wall Street. And that morning at Wall Street, like my stomach was doing like somersaults, like I thought I was gonna lose my bowels, like the whole 9 yards. But it wasn't like I needed someone to anchor me, kind of. And my friend Davis, he's like a Buddhist. He's a yoga master, and once he came, like I knew I could do it. Like he has this very soothing, and he stood in the street. I knew I needed male power for that one because like we were so vulnerable. And so he rode his bike. It was like 35 degrees. It was like 7 in the morning, and he rode his bike from Brooklyn to Manhattan to be there for me. And I thought he was late, but he came. And when I saw him, I was like, "Yes, Lord," because I did not think I could do it. And but being there in that spot, I thought I would be able to feel like the energy of what once happened, but I didn't feel any of it. And I think it was kind of a defense mechanism,
Yeah.
because I've heard other people who went to like Goree Island in Africa, the Door of No Return. One of my friends who is super like, she's a writer, she's a poet, so a very sensitive person. And she said that when I went there, I felt nothing. I didn't feel it. But later, she said it was the most profound place and trip she had ever taken. But I realized in her telling me that it was a defense mechanism. When you go to places of such ghastly horror,
Yeah.
that we still tries to shut that down. Because what would it mean if you tapped into that?
Yeah. And it's also like an origin story of sorts, kind of like being in a cave. You can't see, you can't hear, you can't do anything, but yet you're existing. And it's like you become the dark, you become that whole moment. And there's no way to like really codify what that is in that moment. That's not why you're there. That's not what it's for.
Right, exactly. And when I was there at Wall Street, I just began to meditate. I just when you see me looking in close up, you'll see like I'm kind of zoned out a little bit. And that's what I used that time for. I used that time to meditate, to prayer, to thank the forces that I'm here, that I was created, and that I had this opportunity to do that, because the trauma of the country and the nation and the history is still here, and you see it every day. And I feel like someone has to kind of try to deal with that, solutions for that, answer that, make peace with that, show us how to make peace with that, and then move on. So for me, that this series, White Shoes, was my way of kind of making peace with that and being able to heal,
Up there?
I have a question here too.
Oh, we have them up there too. Okay, you and then you.
I was wondering a couple of things with your talk, that you're contextualizing how you take the moment and the story behind taking the picture, not only what it symbolizes in past and present, but also your own story of nervousness and all of this. That's very interesting, this one. And the people around you, helping your sister, this friend, all of these kinds of networks coming in to take that picture. So it's really interesting. And second, I was wondering if there's any picture in which your sister comes, or because you have your mother, you have your daughter, yourself. Where is she?
Yeah, she doesn't want to be like part of this. She
There
doesn't
we
want
go.
to be part of, like I said, I wanted to include her in mitochondrial. And she was like, no. She's this person who is kind of traumatized from class pictures. And she's like, she doesn't believe she could take good pictures, or she doesn't like the way she looks in pictures. She's a gorgeous woman. But she, for what but I still sneak them all the time. And actually, on my Facebook page, I did this kind of tribute to her, and I showed all the outtakes of the White Shoes series with her standing on the steps of the Supreme Court. She wasn't standing at Wall Street because Davis stood in, and what that meant too, as for a white man to stand on a spot where enslaved people were sold. So I wish I had remembered to bring. But one day, maybe it'll be in my book of the story of him and I. But yeah, I take pictures of her all the time, and sometimes I do show them. Yeah.
But that's powerful that she's like this, like she's a witness. She's like, it's not about me. I'm supposed to help. She's like a midwife for you.
And a couple of times, like I've asked her, like when we're shooting, I go, "Did I get it?" And she goes, "I don't know. That's for you to." And I'm okay, I forgot. Yeah, okay, whatever. And I'll come back, and I was like, "But she's right. This is your thing. You do you. I'm just here for a little, just medical reasons."
Okay, kind of jumping right off of that. You're talking about it a little bit, but I was just thinking maybe you could talk more about, are there certain bodies of work of yours that are more kind of transgressive and transcendent in their in the process versus the result, and has that ever surprised you?
Like, for example.
So you're talking about the kind of the process that you have, and the stories, and the exploring the history, and have you ever like kind of just gone for the photograph and then realized the process was the thing for you, or vice versa?
I think so. Yeah, like in the image of the Statue of Liberty. Certainly, like that, and that to me, those are kind of like the magic of photography for me when that happens, when you're not thinking, and or you're thinking, you are actually thinking, you just don't realize it.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I was definitely thinking, it's not a total accident, but I was relaxed.
Right.
I was in a relaxed mood, and if you're a photographer, if you're an artist for a long time, certainly your brain already knows what to do. Like,
Right.
your body already knows what to do, and your eyes are looking. You don't even realize. And even I found, like, I'm kind of new to digital. I used to be black and white, darkroom purist. And I would love when I took pictures and go in the dark room and then put them in the developer, and then that's when you like, and it would be something where you were on automatic and you didn't even realize you captured that. And that, to me, is when the magic of photography, and why I love it, and why I continue to take pictures, because we kind of all, as photographers, always waiting for that happy accident. Like, that's what makes art to me. That's what makes us, drives us and keeps us, looking for that one. You could take 1,000 pictures, but there'll be like that one that jumps out that you didn't even realize.
But I think that this, like, allowing things to come in, channeling is a huge part of your practice. And I would love to hear more artists talk about channeling more in a scholarly context and a part of our artistic practice. I mean, that image that you show when you're on the rocks and that bird just came right in, like, that's ancestor spirit for me. I'm like, that bird, and it was like that moment that allowed, something to come in. And, you're taking pictures of the Statue of Liberty, and then it's something something obstructing, something that's saying, like, I need to be heard. And it doesn't always come in the form of a body. You know what I mean? It doesn't always come in this kind of human form.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? Even with you standing there and there's the cabs and all of that, there was fog in the background that was like doing something, like coming from the crevices of the building. And that's what I noticed the most about that picture. Not even your body standing there, but there's like this mist that's coming.
Yeah, because
you
it's
know?
so early in the morning.
Yeah, but I don't know, like allowing these spaces to kind of channel, and just like your sister's like, I ain't got nothing to do with it. Like sometimes we also need to do that. Like I don't have nothing to do with it. I'm just gonna set up my camera and I'm gonna see what happens.
But that conjuring and that quietness that you need as an artist. I was talking to the photographer Adric Cowan. He's African American like legend now, because he's 82, and he was Gordon Parks' assistant. And I was photographing him for Culture magazine, and we were having a talk, and he said, you know, as an artist, you need to have this quiet moment. All the talking and all the this and that and move, you have to like shut it down sometimes, and it will come to you. Let the force come to you, let the ideas come to you. The artisticness and the creativity is found in silence sometimes. And so it was so brilliant because like that picture, Not Gone with the Wind, at the Lefferts house, when I first saw it, I didn't even recognize myself. Like I felt like I could see it in my face that I was conjuring a moment, like, and one of my friends, Pamela, the poet, Pamela Sneed, she loved that picture. She wants that picture so badly. She said, because you were conjuring there, and I realized that that's what I'm doing a lot of times in that moment. Like I get there and I feel the presence in the land. I feel something, and I'm creating a scene, you know, and that's how that works for me.
Yeah, I mean, you're working with the dead, by the dead, nearby the dead, for the dead. Like
For the dead.
yeah, it's a lot of dead there, and it's like, where do they go?
Right.
And then they're like, ooh, she know us. Let's hop up in this, you know. And they kind of make themselves known too. That's my ghost lady talking.
That's our ghost lady.
Okay,
It's
we
not
can
always
talk
that
about
like
that all
that.
night. My students know. Y'all know. But let's do two more questions and then we can wrap up. Is that okay? All right.
Wait, I'm right here.
We got some. The
okay.
lights are blinding up
I
here.
can see you now.
So I really, the work is just like so powerful, and it's like it's so full of history and like biography and stuff like that. What I was wondering is, outside of that, what do you think is your more secular interest in photography? Like the notes where you're just like, I want to just like go and take a picture. Like, how do I ask this? Like, yeah, like when you wilding out on Instagram, what's your favorite subject? Like, when you're just like, this ain't for no museum, this ain't for the answers, this is for my pleasure right here in this moment. Like,
Oh my goodness, I don't know.
He got
When
personal
I
real
know he
quick.
did, right? I don't know. I tend to take a lot of pictures of my daughter and post them. I'm a real mom. Even though I be naked, though, I'm still my mom. So I be taking pictures of my daughter. I don't know if you go to my Instagram.
You're active on
I'm a
Facebook.
single mom,
though.
so,
But
yeah.
you're active on Facebook, and you
Yeah.
post a lot of like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, I love that image that you posted of that woman. She was at the amusement park, and she had on a thong and all of that, and people were like, oh, how dare she? And you were like, she's getting it. She looks good.
Oh yes,
Like
yes,
a lot of like
yes.
empowerment.
Okay, I remember that. Right.
And celebrating
Yeah.
other people's bodies.
Yeah.
And that was amazing. I was like, yes, Nona, yes. You know?
Yeah, I love my fat girls, you know, because I'm a fat girl, you know. I love all kinds of pictures, you know, from Beyonce to Lizzo to very political. If you go on my Facebook page, it's very political. Lots of articles about politics, history. Things like that. But
Whatever's on your mind, and you're
yeah,
like
whatever's
not
on my
afraid to say
mind.
it. And
But
you
sometimes
just,
I'll throw in some funny pictures or some
Yeah.
funny videos of people doing stupid, crazy things just to mix it up and make you understand I'm just not one dimensional, you know.
And Luna, the dog, I like know everything about Luna through her Instagram account. I'm a fan of Luna.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
you need your cheerleaders. So and she's mine.
I'm
And
obsessed with Nona.
thank thank you.
I mean, she's so amazing. I mean, everything like the research, the history, how you're unabashedly like, okay, and thinking about if we must die, you could literally die from taking the images that you take.
Yes.
I mean, what happened to Eric Garner, and then the heartbreak that his daughter experienced, just so in this state, like to do that, to know that you can risk going to jail, like you could literally die, you could be tackled to the ground
Yes.
at any moment, like right in that city, and like join the dead.
And
But you have to do it anyway, and you do it.
I'll tell you, when I first conceived of the idea, I was like, no, I can't do it.
Wow.
I can't do that. Like once I actually realized what it took to create the series, to put my body on the line. You know, people ask me, why do you have to be naked? You know, and sure, anybody could have done that, fully clothed and gone to those sites and done that. But I felt like it was more important to risk something. You know, to really risk something. Yes, we had slavery, but what does it mean for you to be fully clothed and go to slave sites? Like, what are you saying? You know what I'm saying? And at the time when I began the series, like, the murders of black people had just really begun to hit, and we thought we were like clearing out of that. Obama was president. We were feeling good about ourselves, right, as a nation. It was like, yeah, we're moving past race. We're moving past. And then these murders started happening. Like, they were always happening, but really publicly started getting attention. And I was like, wait a minute. And then I was in grad school. I was in a institution, mostly white institution, of course, as most grad schools are, unfortunately. But I was really, it was a very challenging program. And I was up against a lot of deep stuff. And I realize now that that was my way of answering many things. What was going on in the nation? What was I feeling? What was I feeling in grad school? The way I was being treated, the way that I was not being validated, the way that my work was not being taken seriously, the way that my classmates were looking at me, and so all of that was like, and I realized that you have to be a little bit crazy, kind of, to go out there and do that. And that was my little bit of crazy. But at the same time, the idea of my city being transformed and the fact that I would one day not be there and people wouldn't even know I existed, my family existed, that my community existed there would be erased. And I felt like all those people that came before me were here and they actually made this city, and look, we don't even acknowledge them. So it would not die. Like, the idea would not die. I even told my mom, I said, listen, I'm going to go down to City Hall and I'm going to do this project. And she was like, I wouldn't do that if I was you. And she was like, she did. She was like, ooh, ooh, no.
Queen Elizabeth
Yeah,
told
Queen Elizabeth
you no.
was like, no. And I was like, for once, I did not listen to my mother. I did
You were
not.
chosen. I mean, sometimes the work chooses you. Like, you become a kind
believe
of.
that. I believe that.
And while where is she? Ann? I remember when you came in my studio and you said, you're a servant to this work. And I was like, I am. You know? Like, I'm working for this work. I'm not working to make the work. I'm working for the
Right.
work, you know? And it's like, what does it mean to be chosen in that way? And it's not a path that a lot of people can take. It's not for everybody.
I mean, some days I get up and I know I have to go do a shoot and I won't do it. I was like, no, I can't do it today. I don't want to do it today. But when I started adding clothing on, I felt a lot, you know, like I can do it more. But I got so used to being naked, like I could take my clothes off at the drop. Like, if you asked me to get naked now, I probably could do it. You know? And then people started asking me, though. People would ask me, I want you to be in this project of mine, and I want you to, and I had to start saying No.
No.
Like I did it one time for my friend Davis because he had this great idea about Adam and Eve, and Davis is white, so he felt he wanted to reinterpret Adam and Eve, Adam as a white man and Eve as a black man, of a black woman. And I really liked the idea of it, and I did do it series of images. It wasn't for whatever reason he gave up on it. I think he just got interested in other things, but that was the one time. But after that, I decided, that my body would be used for me and my projects and my work, and I didn't want it to be something that was cheapened or
Commodity,
titillating
yeah.
or some kind of sexual thing. Literally, though, that is how enslaved people were put on display. In slavery, they were actually stripped down. They were oiled up. If they were skinny or sick, they would feed them to fatten them up, just like cattle. And before an auction, and then they would literally put you on stage naked. Or woman, there's writings where they describe these slave auctions, and one woman, she was clothed. She had a scarf over, she was holding her baby, and someone yells out, make her take that damn thing off. Like, why are you covering up her? Like, you had no dignity, you couldn't have any pride. You were a straight commodity. And could you actually imagine what that felt like? And so I felt like in the series I had to show it. Just a teeny bit, take you there, just a little bit.
And it's happening now, like the prison industrial complex, and you're like stripped. Like as soon as you enter into these prisons and these
Squat,
gates
cough,
and all of those things, like those violences to the body and that like nakedness. Like there's a difference between like the nude in art history and being naked, you know. And so that stripping is something that is still very present in
society.
Still haunting.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you say no. I would say no too.
Yeah.
No. You can't get all of this.
One more.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for being here. You said something that kind of struck me as interesting. You talked about how you felt like you should be taking a photo of the Statue of Liberty when you took that photo, and to maybe think about how many tens of thousands of photos there must be of the Statue of Liberty that are sort of decaying on hard drives right now, which you also alluded to. So I wanted to ask, like, what does it mean to you to like take a picture of famous monuments like the Statue of Liberty or the Jefferson Memorial, especially considering like all the loaded history that's sort of right in front of us but also invisible at the same time?
Yeah. Well, I felt like to do that series, yes, of monuments that have been photographed thousands upon thousands of times, but another personal kind of goal, and I didn't realize that the series would become as big as it did, because it was kind of a touristy pleasure kind of thing, but it was also the challenge for me, breaking up the monotony of doing a series like that, to go to a series where I could, like a little challenge of, could I take a picture that's different from all the other pictures of that thing, that monument. And I had been reading about the Revolutionary War, and just wondering about how come all these people that were these black people that were in the Revolutionary War, you don't hear a mention about them, right? So there was that. But yeah, it was about the challenge of photographing these monuments in the way they haven't been before. That was just a simple assignment for myself.
I'm sorry, that's actually all the time
Oh,
we
that's
have.
it.
Oh,
We
okay.
getting kicked out. Sorry.
All right.
We could talk forever
Yeah.
about these things.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.